Hey everybody, AwesomeMattG here, and today we're going to be doing
A novel idea.
Thank you! I had forgotten the title of the series!
You're welcome.
And obviously we have Capricious here with us as well.
Hello.
And for those of you who have kept an eye on my channel's update videos, you would have known that today we're going to be reviewing The Martian by Andy Weir. Partially because I read the book and I love it, and partially because the movie's getting ready to come out and it's going to be freaking sweet.
Yes.
So, obviously, before we get into it, if you have not read the book and or do not want spoilers to either the book or movie, you probably don't want to be watching this video or listening to this audio file if I make an audio version or whatever. But, yeah, it's lots of spoilers. We're going to ruin the entire plot of the movie and book for you. So, but otherwise, if you've read the book or have thoughts or opinions or anything, feel free to voice your opinions down in the comments. And, yeah, so we'll get started.
Okay.
So, obviously, the book starts with Mark being stranded already. Like,
Yes.
right at the beginning, he's just by himself.
Yeah.
Because I think... See, now that I'm trying to think about it, I'm like... Right after the...
Well, I mean, the main point is he is stranded on
Yeah.
Mars without real hope of getting back to Earth, and everyone thinks he's dead.
Yeah, yeah. That's the worst part about it, is that everybody thinks he's dead, because... That's what it was. He wakes up on the surface, is the very beginning of the book. But yeah, basically there's the storm that comes and disrupts their mission, because you've got the entire Ares 3 crew there, and they have a big old storm that comes and disrupts their mission, but that had to be fucking terrifying
Well,
initially, because I mean, they mentioned later that the habitat that they're in is designed to withstand, what, 150 kilometers an hour winds or something like that?
I don't remember the exact amount.
Yeah, and then the storm was like no, that wasn't the HAB. It was the actual ascent vehicle. The MAV was designed to withstand so much, and the storm was like 15 or 20% stronger than that. So they had to abandon.
Yeah. But, and okay, go ahead.
I couldn't imagine having to go through a storm like that, because I mean we live in Texas, so I mean I've gone through hurricanes, and that's kind of, you know, unnerving.
Of course, but I think it's one thing to be going through a hurricane on Earth, surrounded by people and you know, atmosphere you can breathe, and then going through that on Mars.
Not an exact duplication there, but
Good comparison. It's the closest comparison you can give. I get that.
yeah.
What I was gonna say is, you know, more to the point of wanting to talk about characters and stuff, and not necessarily plot points point by point. Like,
Oh, well, yeah, I was just referring to the storm part of it.
that's fine. I just wasn't sure how this was going to go. We haven't done this in a really long time.
Well, this is yeah, how we did it in the first video. We basically talked about characters and their development through the book.
Yeah,
and
how
stuff
we
like
felt
that.
about them.
Yeah.
Well, first I want to say that I truly, truly loved the book. I absolutely just fell in love with it. I watched the movie trailers before I read the book, and the stipulation was if I wanted to watch the movie with you, I needed to read the book.
Yeah, because I read the book first.
Yes. And
I read the book like 6 months ago.
I agreed, kind of begrudgingly.
Fine, I'll read the book.
And I read it out loud to us on our trip to Arkansas. And it was amazing. I didn't want to put it down. For coming from someone who didn't want to read it and, you know, basically dragged my feet about it, I mean, it made me cry a couple of times. Three times.
Yeah.
The book made me cry. It draws you in emotionally.
What about the book as a whole do you think made you love it so much?
I think that, well, I think for one, I really felt connected to Mark Watney it's the human condition, you know, this struggle watching him to try to live, and I got really emotionally attached to this person. It wasn't that I felt like I was like connected to him on like a personal basis, like I totally feel the kind of situation he's in, because it would be impossible for that. But I just feel like he made you really just love him as a person, and you wanted him against all odds to survive. And I just got incredibly attached to that part of it. Just, I guess, the basic human wanting someone to be okay. The author did an amazing job.
This is almost exactly word for word the first sentence of the teaser trailer.
Oh,
the whole, there's the human condition that everybody helps each other out.
Well, that was the end of the book.
That's actually the last line in the book. Word for word is the whole.
And that is, to me, if you've read the book, and you know,
obviously, hopefully you have if you're listening to this, 'cause
right.
Otherwise, spoilers.
At the very end of the book, he talks about that we as humans have the need to help each other out, and I think that that's absolutely true, because I felt that way. I wished I could have reached in the book and helped him in some way, and I don't think that I've felt sort of that emotionally attached to a person or a situation or what was going on in a book in a really long time.
I don't think I've ever been that attached to a character in a book.
Yeah, no,
like
I agree.
I've read lots of other books. I read, you know, Game of Thrones, and I read all the Ender series, and I read all of the Expanse series.
You're reading the Sword of Truth?
I'm reading the Sword of Truth series right now, and I get connected to certain characters in those stories, of course. And when again, like you, I agree with you completely. I think The Martian is probably one of the best sci-fi books ever written.
I think it sounds weird to say this, but I think you'll understand if you've read it, that Mark Watney just feels so human to me. You know?
He doesn't... Yeah, the author doesn't write this character to be this... Because, I mean, you think to yourself, okay, he's an astronaut that's on Mars. So, obviously, he's going to be this insanely intelligent guy that's going to have a really high IQ, and he's going to be really buff because they don't send... You have to be in great physical shape.
Right.
I wouldn't say buff, but you have to be in peak physical performance to go on an astronaut mission. So you get these predetermined conceptions of what an astronaut is going to be like. And
we can also physically compare it to actual astronauts, what they look like, and their intelligence level and stuff.
Yeah, and they're in amazing shape, and they're some of the smartest people on the planet.
Off the planet, huh?
He's the smartest guy on Mars. He's the only guy on Mars. But anyway, but yeah, you get this preconceived notion of what an astronaut is and how he's going to be, and then you get exposed to Mark as a character, and he's like an average guy.
I think that's what kind of surprised me. Is I think that I went into it almost assuming that he was going to be... I mean, I know I watched some of the movie trailers or whatever, but you don't know. I thought he was going to be more unapproachable. Like, his intelligence level was just going to be something that you couldn't understand.
Like a Sheldon Cooper or a Leonard or something like that, where it's almost off-putting.
Yeah. I really thought that that's the way I was going to feel about him, but it really, really quickly, you kind of just... Well, I fell in love with him really quickly.
It's like the line from one of the teaser trailers for the movie is a line from relatively early in the book, when, you know, after the point where NASA figures out that he's stuck on Mars, and they're thinking about it, and they go, God, what's going through his head right now? And then it quickly zips back to Mark, and he's like, how come Aquaman can control whales? They're mammals, not fish. And that's it. That's the extent of that conversation. And then it switches back to NASA and talking about that. Just right there, that shows you the kind of person he is. By that point, he'd been on Mars for like 45, 50 days or something like that. And they're like, oh my God, the psychological problems he must be going through, knowing that he thinks everybody in the world thinks he's dead and he's alone.
And being that isolated for that long, it really
and he's got a
great
great sense of humor about it. I mean, all things considered, he does take serious things very seriously.
Well, he keeps a really positive attitude about everything. And I think that that would be really, I don't think I would be able to do that. I know that, you know, you're an astronaut, you're highly trained to deal with these sorts of situations, but I think it's one thing to go through a simulation and be trained on this, and it's another thing to be left on Mars and go, okay, I'm going to be here. I have enough food to last, what, like, they had enough food to last, what, 30 days, but it was
originally it was 60 days because they wanted excess food just in case something went wrong for 6 people. And when he did the math after being just one person and going down to two-thirds rations, he got like, I think it's like 400 and something days worth of food that he actually had.
Right,
but
the next mission wasn't going to be for 4 years.
Yeah, and then he mentions if they don't completely scrap it, now that an astronaut has died on Mars.
Right.
And so he's like, I've got to take a year's worth of food and stretch it 4 years? This is impossible.
Yeah, and the next mission wasn't even going to be anywhere near him. It was like, what, like 3,000 kilometers away or something?
Something like that, like 2,000 or 3,000 kilometers away. And that's like, I don't know how far exactly that is, but that's like all the way across the United States, basically.
Well, yeah, I think, I was thinking in terms of, like, I wanted to say it took him like 90 sols to get there or something like that. It was a large amount of sols to get to Schiaparelli crater, which is where the next
mission was supposed to go.
I just really, really loved Mark Watney as a character. It was impossible not to just laugh and, you know,
laugh at certain situations. And another, like, when he finally got, like, when he went out and got Pathfinder and brought Pathfinder back to the hab and hooked it up.
Yeah.
And then he finally established communication with NASA, and he said that, like, basically when he woke up and he saw that the antennas were pointed towards Earth, because the only way they could do that is if Earth had told the antennas to move.
Right.
He like immediately broke down.
That's the first time I cried.
Yeah.
I cried when I don't remember the exact line, but it was basically, Earth knows I'm alive.
Yeah,
or, you know,
I'm not alone.
Houston knows that. And I mean, it wasn't like I was bawling, but I got very choked up, and I cried a little.
Misty eyes.
I got dust in my eyes. I had to stop reading for a few minutes just because that's how emotionally attached I was to this person. It wasn't like Mark Watney saved. It was just the fact that Earth knew he was. And the funny thing is I seen the trailer. I already knew that he established contact with Earth.
Yeah, but
because it's in the trailer. But reading it in the book, it's so different.
In the trailer, you don't get a connection to the
characters. I really didn't.
You don't get a connection to Mark. I mean, you're like, oh no, he's a guy stuck on Mars. That really sucks.
Oh, that might be a really interesting, you know, story to watch. But actually reading the book,
yeah, because he doesn't establish contact with NASA until probably a third of the way through the book, maybe.
Yeah, it's
a significant chunk of the book.
He had already been living in the hab and doing everything, growing potatoes. He had already grown potatoes.
He had already started growing potatoes. Yeah, because NASA was slowly figuring out what he was doing.
Right. Well, because they had. Because Mindy Park, who had been looking at the satellite pictures, noticed something. There was no dust on the solar cells on top of the hab.
Yeah, she noticed all these things that were just coincidences.
Yeah, and it was little things out of place that shouldn't be, that all added up to holy crap.
If one thing was out of place, you would go, maybe it's just a coincidence. But like 6 things were just like, not all these 6 things would happen.
Right. So yeah, that was the first time I cried, is just knowing that he had reestablished contact with Earth. And then I guess because that was the first time I thought to myself, there's hope. They know he's alive. They're going to be able to communicate with him and hopefully help him stay alive. And now that they know he's alive, they're going to try to do whatever they can to rescue him.
Yeah.
And I'm getting goosebumps now talking about it. But it still makes me feel so emotional about that part. That was just, for me, it was really great. So
I think the second part is when he, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the second part was when he flipped the rover in Schiaparelli.
I cried then. I cried when he flipped the rover in Schiaparelli. You know, I didn't cry when the hydrazine, was it the hydrazine, when he was trying to burn
when
off?
The hab exploded.
When the hab exploded, I didn't cry. I mean, I panicked, but I think it was because by then, when he was on his way to Schiaparelli, he had already been, you know, kind of caught in a dust storm that he didn't know about, that I was already so nervous about that because that could have made it so that he wouldn't have made it to Schiaparelli to even get rescued. He had come so far.
Yeah, because by the time he got to Schiaparelli, even when he got to the MAV, he still had like 40-something days where he had to make modifications.
Right.
And if he had crashed, it would have taken him like, he said that he could have walked the distance, but it would have taken him like a week to walk the distance. Then he wouldn't have had enough time to modify the MAV.
Well, and back on Earth, they were monitoring the dust storm, and they knew that he was going to be consistently losing power, that if he drove into the heart of the storm...
Okay, that was before Schiaparelli.
That was right before Schiaparelli, because that was right before he flipped. And that's what I was saying, is that I was already so emotionally upset that what if he doesn't realize it? What if he drives into this dust storm, and then he can't make it to Schiaparelli, and so... But luckily, he figured it out. But then he's making his way down the, like... I wanted to call it a ramp, but it's not a ramp because obviously it's
well, in all intents and purposes, it's a ramp. It's a...
made of soil.
Yeah,
I was going to call it Earth, but obviously it's Mars.
Martian soil.
Martian soil.
It's an accumulation of Martian dust and soil that made a ramp.
And when it flipped, I started crying because at this point he's so close,
and it's so close to the end of the book too that you're like, it's plausible that this could just be his failure.
Yeah, that's it. Because I kept saying that I desperately wanted to know what happened because I really, really wanted him to live, but maybe there wasn't a happy ending. Maybe there wasn't.
Yeah, because I wouldn't tell you.
No, of course not.
There were a couple of times that you were all like, just tell me.
I wanted so desperately to know. I think because it was giving me almost anxiety. I was having, I call it stress in my chest, like tightness in my chest, like that much stress over Mark Watney, over this
fictitious character.
But I was so attached to him. So yeah, when it flipped, I started crying. And I think also, and the author did an amazing job at this part, and I mentioned it because he did it a couple of times, where most of the time you're kind of first person, you're looking through Mark's eyes, and he goes to third person when he starts talking about the rover. Is a rover flipping? Because he's like, the Martian didn't know this, you know.
Well, earlier in the book, that's one thing I wanted to touch on that I thought the author did, Andy Weir, I thought he did amazing, because earlier in the book, when the airlock blew off the side of the hab with him inside it, two or three times prior to that, like it would go back and forth a couple of times, he would talk about the manufacturer of hab canvas and the stress testing of hab canvas, and how it was glued together and how it was shipped from one place and then shot over to Mars like 4 years previously. And at that point, everything had been first person, either from Mark's point of view or from a NASA administrator's, Venkat Kapoor's point of view, or any of that. And then all of a sudden, you're just getting this omniscient third-party past information, and you're like, what is this?
Right.
And then right then, boom, the hab canvas blows and knocks the airlock off,
which he's inside
in at the time, and it creates this huge havoc. And then later in the book, they start doing the same thing. They back away and they start describing how the ramp gets manufactured, and you're like, oh shit.
I immediately had this sinking in my gut sort of feeling that something bad is about to happen, because the last time it went to third person, that happened. But the amazing thing is, it changing to that view, this top-down view of it, it didn't...
It's weird that you say view when it's text,
I know,
isn't it?
I know it is.
That's exactly how I pictured it, too.
That's how I'm picturing it, because instead of looking through Mark Watney's eyes, suddenly I'm floating above him, looking down at the situation happening.
And you're looking at the entire ramp as like this small object.
Right. And as it's happening, it did not disconnect me from Watney.
No.
It just gave me this full view of what was happening, and at the same time, this sort of like reach of, there's nothing I can do to stop it.
Yeah, it disconnects you, so it makes you feel like you're, or at least for me, it made me feel like I was so far away, like if I wanted to do something, I couldn't.
Yeah.
Because I'm no longer right next to Mark.
Right. I can't reach out and just stop him or be like, stop, slow.
Something bad's gonna happen.
Right. You can't do it because you're too far away.
I love that you and I had these exacts, and I'm sure this is
it's a universal. I'm sure some people perceived
guys,
it this way and some people didn't. But I'm sure some of you out there, like, who read the book are like, that's exactly how I saw it as well. I'm not alone.
Yeah, no, it's word for word exactly what you said is how I felt.
I started crying then just because I had already been so emotionally up and down, and here he was so close to getting his Scaparelli. You could taste it.
He was in Scaparelli.
Yeah, he was there. He was gonna make his way, and then he crashes, and I thought, if he's not dead...
Maybe he broke something.
Maybe he broke something. Or, you know that it talked about the hitch, because he was pulling the one...
Yeah, the hitch was destroyed.
And I'm like, he's not gonna make it.
Yeah, because the other rover had his water reclaimer and his
it
oxygenator.
Had everything important. I was like, it's all destroyed.
Yeah, all of it's just jacked.
So
and you're like, he's going to have to stay 40 days with no oxygen and no water? What
he's
the hell?
As good as dead is how I felt. And it just completely obliterated my emotions for that short amount of time.
I know. And then when he finally gets the MAV... I was going to say completed. Modified.
Yeah.
He turned it into a what did he call it? A ragtop?
Oh, yeah, he called it a ragtop.
He's like, so I'm not going into Mars in this like really expensive shuttle anymore. I'm going in there in a convertible. And he goes, oh, we're going to get you to put a piece of canvas over the top. Great, so it's a ragtop.
Yeah.
And then when he's blasting off to go into orbit again to catch the Hermes as it flies by, the canvas rips and starts tearing right as he starts passing out from the G-force. And he comments, he's all like, huh. He sees hand canvas flapping and he's like,
but see, once again,
weird.
Right at that moment, remember they started talking about the screws and the tests on the screws and stuff like that happened. Because again, right at that moment, it took you out and started talking about that.
Right when you said that too, about screws, it reminded me about the Iris launch on Earth.
We'll get to that in just a moment.
Because that was the same pulling back.
That was the same pulling back. The author did a really good job with, it's sort of a foreshadowing. You knew shit was going to happen, but it didn't take away like, oh, Court, now I know something bad's going to happen. Instead, you're like, no, something bad's going to happen.
Yeah.
Crap.
It wasn't him pulling out of the action like that. It was a spoiler in the aspect of you knew something was going to happen, but it wasn't a spoiler to the point where you knew what was going to happen.
Because I remember, was it right before Mark Watney passed out, he thought, I wonder where I can get a screw like that.
Yeah, because he saw it, and he was all like, huh, that's weird.
It's a really interesting looking screw, and you'd have to use a special, like, wrench or screwdriver or whatever for it.
Because everything in NASA's, he comments, everything in NASA is like meticulously engineered. What made them decide to use a 5-sided screw instead of a 6-sided screw?
There had to be a reason behind everything. You're
like, because part of it, the reason he was thinking of it was not because it looked interesting or anything like that, but because you knew at those G-forces, his brain was losing blood. It was being pushed out of his brain, so he was starting to think incoherent thoughts. But that didn't necessarily match the situation.
Right. That was the third time I cried.
It's when the hab canvas started tearing.
Is when the hab canvas started tearing, because then he's launching into it, up into orbit, and I thought he finally made it. He fixed this, MAV to get up into orbit, which it was never made to do, so he can get rescued. And now he's not going to get rescued.
Yeah. Now the canvas ripped.
Oddly enough, I didn't cry when he got rescued or when he was back in. I was totally relieved, but I didn't cry. I cried every time there was sort of twice when there was a bad moment, once when there was contact.
Yes.
That was the third time I cried.
Because the contact was just so emotional. It was a release of
I felt
stress
so
at
relieved.
that point. Yeah.
So let's talk about Iris, because you just mentioned that with the testing and stuff. Obviously, when they realized Mark was stranded, they needed to do whatever they could to try to rescue him.
It's funny when they were, for me at least, when they were starting to build Iris, and they were planning it and getting everything set up and being like, okay, we need a capsule that can carry this much food, and we'll send a rope, we'll send a radio, and we'll send a couple other things. I was like, all right, this is going to be cool. This is going to make it so he can last 4 years.
Yeah.
And then the book at some point is going to go 2 years later and skip, and then go another year later.
Like, phew, and you're like, everything's great.
Okay, great. And then as soon as Iris was on the launching pad, before it pulled out to third person and started talking about the the brackets or whatever in the top of Iris breaking loose. Before they did that, I went, oh shit, what if this fails?
Well,
and I started panicking a little.
That's also because they talked about that because they were on such a time crunch, because they talk about Earth and Mars have to be just in the right alignment in order to send off, I was going to say shoot rockets, but you know what I mean? To send packages to Mars, whatever it may be. Because
otherwise they could still send it later, but it would take too long to get there and Mark would have starved to death.
Right. So they had this really small window and they talked about, what can we do that can cut down time? And then they were like, we cannot do all the pre-launch checks. And they're like, well, what if we don't do those checks?
Yeah, what's the percentage of times that they find a problem? And then they were like, like 20%. And they're like, and what's the percentage of time those problems would cause a failure? And they're like, probably like 10%. And they're like,
I think it was a lot lower. I want to say it was like 4%. It was it was really
low.
Statistically, when you're talking about sending something into space, it was a very high number. You can't skip that.
Well, it's like they were talking about at a couple of different parts. They were talking about, there's a 4% failure chance. And one of the guys goes, that's more than double of anything we've ever done before, and we've had failures before.
Right.
And it's like, so I don't know what the exact percentage is, but if there's a failure percent of like half of 1%, chances are NASA probably scraps it.
Right. So 4% or whatever that number was.
It was way above their threshold.
Way too high. And
to us, thinking, we're like, well, that's a 96% success ratio. That's really good.
That's great. I would take those odds.
But also, when you're, like they mentioned, when you're talking about a human's life, 96% is actually not that good.
Right. But yeah, once again, right then, when Iris started to fail, they kind of they pulled back and started talking about whatever it was, the brackets or the screws, because it was one of the screws failed.
Right.
And they were like, that's fine because you still have three others.
You have 3 others.
They also didn't test the food material smacking against.
Yeah, because the food material, because of all the G-force, had partially liquefied.
Right.
And then it floated into 0G, and then when the next stage hit, it slammed down.
That's what they talked about. That one screw would have been tested. Oh, it's bad. They would have just replaced it, and that's all that would have needed to have been done.
Yeah, and then it would have been fine.
But unfortunately, because they skipped all the pre-tests that take a few days, because they have to keep running the tests over and over again, understandably.
Sure.
It failed. And I remember when Iris, I think that I knew it was going to fail. I don't know why. I just knew that would be too easy.
I felt the same way.
And I had sort of a gut feeling of, this is going to fail, and...
It felt too easy, like you said.
And so when it did fail, although I was so disappointed, I wasn't to the point that I was completely shocked. Like, it wasn't like...
You were just like, yeah, of course it fucking fails. Great.
Right. And I'm like, what are they going to... Yeah, what are they going to... Everything that could go wrong has already gone wrong. It's going to continue going wrong.
And then when Mark...
What are they going to do now?
And then when Mark sends the message, hey, how'd the launch go? You're like, oh,
that really stung. Yeah.
So bad. Because, somebody has to tell him that he's fucked.
Hey, dude, you're going to die. Like, how do you deliver that news? And, of course, that they wouldn't say that to him. They're like, they had to tell him, of course, that it failed.
Yeah, the launch had failed. We're working on something else.
Yeah, don't worry. We're going to work on something else. But I think,
NASA never goes in with just one plan.
Well, of course not. But, I mean, that was their best plan.
Yeah.
Really? That was sort of all their eggs in one basket for that short time.
When they state after that there is no other booster that can reach them in time.
Right.
They're like, we have to build another booster. How long does it take to build a booster? Like 9 months. How long do we have? Like 45 days.
Right.
And
well, they even had, they brought in a nutritionist or whoever, and they were like, how long can he go without food? What's the best case scenario here?
And she's like...
What if he doesn't, what if he skips meals sort of thing? They're trying to do anything to extend his life.
And that was the part where she was I think it was a female character.
I want to say it was a woman.
When they tell her that, and she's all like, actually, he's eating less calories than I would like him to, and he's all like, figure it out. He needs like 6 more days.
Yeah.
I don't care what you have to do.
Whatever
we're not talking about optimal conditions here.
Right.
Make him live.
That was that was their only priority.
Yeah.
Is getting him to live. Because also at this point, globally, everyone was watching Mark Watney.
Because they had to announce it.
They had to announce
That was something
He was
I never
alive.
knew. That was something I never knew at that point, was when they took the pictures of the HAB site, and Venkat Kapoor came down to talk to Mindy Park about it, and they figured out that he was alive, and she's all like, how long? Because NASA is a government agency that's publicly funded by tax money, so all the pictures they take have to be made public. And, I mean, obviously, you and I are not sitting here every day watching all the pictures that come out of NASA.
Not,
but there are some people that do.
Of course.
Somebody would have seen that, and they're like, how long can we keep this hidden until we have to release it to the public? And I was all like, holy shit, that's true.
Yeah.
Everything has to be made public. Somebody's going to connect these dots like they did and go, Mark Watney's alive. We need to announce this.
Yeah, if she connected the dots, don't tell me one other person on Earth couldn't connect those dots as well. Someone somewhere would have.
Yeah.
And for them to figure it out before NASA or to call NASA on it, that would be the last thing.
Oh, it would have looked so much worse.
Wait, that would have been the last thing that Annie Montrose would have wanted.
Annie would have been... Well, she was pissed. It was hilarious when they're all like, hey, Annie, come in here. We need to tell you something. Mark Watney's still alive. And she was like, fuck!
Yeah.
She's like, God, it's not that she was disappointed that it was alive. It was, she knew the shitstorm she was going to be in.
Yeah, she had just had to announce that
he was dead. And then, like, 3 days later, she's going to... Oh, by the way, we made a mistake. He's actually alive.
I don't know if it was 3 days, but they had already done the memorial for him.
Yeah, they'd already done the funeral.
They had made stamps with him on it.
They had made national stamps, yeah.
You know?
That was really cute that they put that into the book, and because it has no bearing on the story whatsoever. It's just really a neat side story.
I think that you commented, because I remember specifically asking you about that when I was reading the book to us, is that because they had, like, I don't remember what it was called, but it was basically, I don't know if it was
Mark
CNN
Watney Hour.
But yeah, it was the sort of CNN of the book had Mark Watney Hour, where it wasn't every day.
Every day there was a minimum of 1 hour.
There was a minimum of 1 hour dedicated to him, and they had all these interviews. But then as a few months went by, suddenly they started with a postal service worker, and I'm like, why the hell are they interviewing some guy from the post office? And he's like, we have these stamps, hey, please return them, because they've never put a live person on a stamp. And I was like, why would they include that? And you're like, well, it's also been like months. They don't have any new information.
They're running out of shit to talk about.
So they're so desperate. They're bringing in the post office to just be like, hey, bring your stamps back, people. And I just thought that was kind of cute as well. So obviously we've talked about, Mark Watney and all that. Obviously he lives. We do know he finally gets rescued. Let's touch a little bit before we stop on the Hermes crew, because we haven't really talked about any of them.
Yeah.
Well, mostly because this entire time they did not know Mark Watney was alive.
I think it's like half of the book they don't know.
Yeah,
give or
it's
take.
Quite a long portion.
Which they mention in multiple occasions, and you actually visit the Hermes crew as first-person characters in the book prior to them knowing of Mark Watney's death, or Mark Watney's being alive. They think he's dead, but because they comment a couple of times about, hey, somebody's like, oh, I'm really bummed that Mark died, and they're like, get your shit together, we still have a mission.
Right.
We still need to get home.
Right.
And so they're being all things considered, they're being extremely professional about it.
Right. And I get why NASA didn't want to tell them, because they didn't want them to be distracted, because they still needed to make it home alive. Yeah,
I think Venkat says, statistically speaking, they're in more danger than Mark Watney is.
Right.
Because Mark Watney's on a planet.
Yeah.
There's a limited number of stuff that can happen to him.
Right. Honestly, I guess because you don't really... I liked Martinez just because you do get that he's just a joker, especially when the Hermes finally gets contact with Mark Watney. and Johansson was talking to him, and then she leaves, and Mark Watney gets a message of like, I'm gonna do sexual things to your body or whatever.
Yeah, as soon as you get back, I'm gonna make all the hot sex with you.
Basically,
or something.
yeah. And Johansson was like, that wasn't me, that was Martinez. So you really get that he's a joker.
The whole crew is really...
Yeah.
And they mention it, I know they mention it in the book, but I don't know if they've mentioned it in any of the movie trailers, that an entire crew is going to be gone and around each other for so long that their primary concern is not necessarily, are you the best at your job, is that are all 5 of you really good together?
Right. Well, personalities, you have to get along with the person that you're going to be working with. You're going to be stuck in space with them for how long on a ship that you cannot get away from them.
Yeah.
You still have to be able to do your job and to let things go and, you know, have fun. And I feel like they seem like a really fun crew. Because you get a sense of like Mark Watney is just a huge joker, and he's just like got this wonderful personality, but
so does everybody else.
So does everyone else.
They all do. They all have surprisingly good.
Even Commander Lewis with her, damn it, all that disco and stuff that she loves.
Yeah. One of my favorite characters, and you don't get enough of him really, is Vogel. And I love the fact that, and a lot of people mention this, I was watching one of the trailers and a lot of people had comments, and I could tell instantly that the people that had put these comments had not read the book, is they were all like, whoa, they made a German guy with a thick German accent and he's eating sausages all the time. Oh, what a freaking German stereotype. And I'm like, no, that's exactly what it is in the book.
Yeah.
They mentioned specifically, he's like, dude, you realize you're like every German stereotype. He's like, what? I love sausage.
Yeah, like to him yeah. It's normal. That's just him.
It's not a stereotype for him. That's just him.
Yeah, so I also really love that you can tell that they all truly love Mark Watney because they decide to risk their lives to go and rescue him.
When you mention that, it reminds me again of the other line that I think Venkit also says, which is like, when they send the Rich Purnell maneuver to the Hermes crew.
NASA doesn't.
When someone hides it in a message and they figure it out, and they realize, and Venkit, they're like, well, of course they're going to do it. They're astronauts. They're inherently crazy.
Yeah.
They don't think about their own lives. They're just like, oh, this is going to be awesome.
Yeah, well, because it's mentioned in the book. They're like, if this goes wrong, you die. If this happens, you die. If this happens, we die. Like, there's a complete notion of this Rich Purnell could absolutely kill us.
Oh, yeah.
All of us.
Yeah.
And everyone was like, I don't care. We're going to go save Mark Watney.
Yeah, none of that matters.
Yeah.
Mark Watney's still on Mars.
And that's really wonderful that, you know, they're all that attached to him. I'm getting goosebumps again. It's just such a great story in that sense. I don't know. I just love the characters. I love the writing. I love the pull back to the third person perspective. I really connected with everything that was going on. Even the people on the Hermes crew that you don't necessarily get to know as close as some of the people at NASA or Mark Watney, I still feel like I know them.
Like Beck and Vogel are probably 2 characters that you get to know the least.
Yeah, and I still feel like
it's
connected to them.
Yeah, it's not like you feel like you don't know them at all. It's just like, well, you know, they weren't necessary for this particular part, so they weren't there. He didn't try to shoehorn people in just to give you a connection. Right.
And I think because he didn't force it, it
felt more real.
It felt natural. It felt real. It's just, I don't know. I love the book so much. I want to read it again. I gave the book to my mom for her to read because I'm like
everybody should read this.
Yes. I'm super excited for the movie.
Let's talk about our favorite part of the book, and we talked about this multiple times after you finished the book, but the ending and how they ended the book was one of my favorite points. Is they rescue Mark.
Oh, yes.
They rescue Mark. They bring him back on the Hermes, but they're still technically at Mars. They're going around Mars at the time, and that's the end of the book. They're just like, Mark is back on the Hermes. The end. They don't get him back to Earth.
And we've already known that prior to this, because they talked about this again, that the Hermes has already been having problems that they've been having to fix.
It's starting to fall apart.
It's starting to fall apart because it wasn't meant to be in space that long. It was meant to come to orbit and get serviced, and it couldn't.
Right, because they just blew right by and came back to Mars.
But you and I talked about a lot that the author left it sort of ambiguous that you created your own ending. Obviously, Mark is rescued. He's no longer on Mars. They're heading back towards Earth. But that was it. Did they make it to Earth? That's your decision.
Yeah. Of course, in my opinion, yes, on the trip from Mars to Earth, they had minor mechanical problems that they would contact NASA about. NASA would give them a temporary fix. They could fix it.
Right.
And then eventually they make it back to Earth and everybody's a national hero.
I absolutely agree. In my mind, they all live. They're all back on Earth. Safe, sound. You know, that's it. for me, it was a happy ending, but I'm very glad that the author didn't spell all that out, because I think it would have become really hokey.
If they had ended it, like you and I talked about this, if they had ended it by them coming back to Earth, and then there was like a ticker tape parade in New York City, and then there were interviews with national television shows, we both thought that would have been very, very hokey. It's a really good way to describe it.
It would have really changed the tone of the book, because the entire book was this sort of struggle to live, and then at the end it would have been like, now we're going to wrap everything up with a really pretty bow and make everything happily ever after. And that's not the book. No, that's not the book. And I'm really glad he just ended it with, it was sort of, I want to call it a soliloquy, but it was sort of the speech that Mark Watney gave that we talked about in the beginning of this, where he was talking about the human condition and people coming together, you know, billions of people on Earth coming together to try to save him and do everything possible.
Every culture on Earth does this. Nobody is excluded from this rule. It's like it's a species-wide thing.
And that was it. And I'm really glad it ended there, and that it gave you the chance to decide on your own. And it, like I said, I didn't want everything wrapped up in a bow. I was completely satisfied that Mark was alive, and I know in my heart that he's alive.
Yeah, he had made it back to the crew. At that point, that was the extent of what I really needed spelled out for me.
Remember the other day, I keep thinking of Mark Watney as a real person now.
You wanted to look him up, like, on Wikipedia?
I did. I for some reason, I thought to myself, I literally thought, I'm like, I wonder what he's up to right now. And then I went, wait a minute, Cappy, he's not real.
He's fake.
He's a character.
He's a fictional character.
But that's how much I feel attached to him. So I really love the book. I think it's great. I can't wait for the movie. I think it's going to be wonderful.
Yeah, I've specifically requested a day off of work so that we could go and have a little movie date afternoon. You would say date night, but we're going to do it.
No, it's just
during the day.
Day date, movie and lunch. But I think it's great. I don't know if there's anything else we really need to touch on. I think that's
pretty much most of it.
I feel comfortable. I mean, obviously there are characters we didn't talk about, but I don't think they necessarily need to be talked about.
We didn't talk about Teddy or Mitch, but anything we talked about with Teddy or Mitch would be spelling out exactly what happened in the book.
Yeah.
And you guys, obviously, if you've listened this long, you've read the book, right?
Hopefully.
He looks at you through this monitor, which doesn't actually go into your house.
Well, like I said, there's details we've left out, like China's involvement and stuff, but I don't think that needs to be said. I think that, again,
that's spelling out the plot of the book, and it's not necessary.
No. I think I'm at a good point.
Yeah.
You ready to end it?
Yeah. So anyway, thank you guys for listening. Like we said earlier, if you have comments or you want to talk about certain sections of the book, feel free to put comments down below. Or myself and Cappy will keep an eye on the comments.
Or you can go to Ask FM if you want a direct reply.
Go to Ask FM.
From there.
I'm going to try to do a little bit of editing on the Goodreads forum group posting thing that I had set up originally. I'm going to try to modify that a little more, so there'll be links in that in the description. Also wanted to let you guys know the next book we'll be reading. The next book I want to read is book 1 from the series The Expanse. The book is called Leviathan Wakes by James S.A. Corey. It's another science fiction book, but it's more of a soft science fiction than a hard science fiction.
He called it a space opera.
Space opera. Thank you. Yeah. So, if you're interested, go out and pick up a copy of that book, or buy the audiobook version. I read it via audiobook, and Capricious read it.
I went to a discount bookstore and got it for like $7.
Yeah.
I don't go out and spend tons of money on it, but pick it up if you can.
Yeah, and we'll be back sometime next month, which would be what, October?
Sure.
This is September, right?
This is September right now. It's the 12th.
Sorry, we'll be back.
Well, not when this gets aired.
But yeah. But we're going to be doing that book next, so pick up a copy, and we'll see y'all then.
Bye.